Well, welcome back to this, our fifth and final segment on the casino issue. Last but not least, we have sitting to my left, Senator Anthony Petrocelli. Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks for having me.
And next to Anthony is second Assistant Majority Leader and Representative Kathy Ann Reinstein. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. One of the things I wanted to start to do at the opening of this session was to talk about the legislation. And you guys have been with it for a long time, maybe even from the beginning, and you can certainly tell me that. Give me a sense for where you've come from and what it includes.
I guess I'll start.
Ladies before gentlemen.
Thank you. So it's been a long time coming. I mean, I would say that the possibility of bringing, it's called Class 3 gaming. So that's table including, that's a casino. So the idea of bringing Class 3 gaming to Massachusetts existed well before Anthony and our tenure in the legislature. In fact, we were at least both still in high school, if not younger, when it started. My father was one of the people who worked on it at the time. So we've both spent most of our careers, or I should say all of our careers, working on this. It's very important to, I think, the community. We grew up in communities that had tracks. And I worked at Wonderland, and it was one of those places that it helped me pay for college. And I had a lot of my friends' parents there who worked, to put my friends through college. And it was a great part-time job. It was a good full-time job for people. And like I've said, 1,000 times, these places were not albatrosses. They were opportunities. And we know the potential, and I think, we know the truth about these jobs. So, I think it would be a great industry. It would grow revenue. I believe that it would increase property value. And, we started having these conversations. And the Speaker DeLeo, who obviously was paramount in this as well, when he finally became Speaker and we knew that there was actually a reality of this actually coming through the House, we decided we were going to do an informational campaign working on it. And I was the one charged with going all over the state and participating in debates on this. It was a very interesting experience. I was police escorted to my car several times in some of the suburbs, people not understanding it, but it was about counteracting the misinformation that's out there and the play on fear that exists still to this day, especially the people who are against this coming in East Boston and Revere. And what was paramount for all of us is that we addressed the realities of some of the downfalls, like whether it's someone you love has a gambling addiction. How do we work with those people to make this real? And we made a commitment to work with them and to make sure that we listened to them as we went through writing this bill, and we did. And a result of that is having the best compulsive gaming language and funding, not only in the country, but I think also including Canada. And it also includes funding for other addiction services, and that's something also that we're trying to grapple with here in these communities. So that's like one thing, there's a lot of things I'm very proud of. And also, the community involvement and why we're all here filming these programs and, the vote that's going to happen on November 5th, that was all something that was very important to us too, because we wanted the neighborhoods to have the final decision and have the input and have to be able to negotiate and come to host community agreements with the facilities that are going to be possibly entering their communities. It's paramount to let them have the say. And I'm just really glad that we're at this point and that, the voters are going to be taking this up on November 5th.
All right, great. Senator Petrocelli.
Yes, what I'd like to add to Kathy's well done kind of description of a little bit of chronology of time was, remember the process this went through, at least from a legislative standpoint. We had multiple debates on this. In the legislative session of 2009-2010, when the bill reached the Senate, we actually had 9 days worth of debate amongst my colleagues on the proposed bill. Now, remember in 2009-2010, that bill never became law. There was a small disagreement between the governor and the legislature on some elements in it. And it wasn't until the 2011-2012 session that we were able to pass a bill that signed into law. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is something that went on over a period of, at least from a formal debate standpoint, a period of 2 legislative sessions in 3 years. And so it was done in a very transparent way. With a lot of public debate, more public debate on this bill than I've actually ever seen for any other proposed piece of legislation that we've seen in recent time. And I think one of the main components of it that I know Kathy spoke to that I'm most proud of is that this law empowers communities, as we've seen recently in Revere and in Boston with Mayor Rizzo and Mayor Menino signing host community agreements, and now leading up to the vote on November 5th. The process cannot advance without a host community agreement and without a vote of the people of the host community saying, yes, we want this to advance in the process with a full application. And so we take great pride in empowering communities in this process, and we're seeing that now as there are people on both sides having a very fair debate on whether they want to see this advance or not.
Looking at the benefits and the overall impact to the state, at the state level, what have you crafted in the legislation, or how do you see the legislation going through to provide those benefits and impact?
So, Anthony's right. The first time when we rolled it out on the House, and it unfortunately didn't finish, and we didn't finish until it was signed in 2011, the Speaker kind of rolled it out when he went before the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, or the Boston Chamber of Commerce, and he said out loud that we are in a blue-collar depression. And it was a really great way to roll it out, and we were very cognizant about those middle jobs, like the majority of people who are working class, who we're ignoring them in our economy, and they're the ones who need the jobs the most, and they're the ones suffering the most as far as unemployment. So we looked at, yes, these facilities will create good paying jobs, but also what else can we do with it? So we looked at community colleges, and we're funding on the state side, not even part of what Revere and East Boston or Boston are getting. How do we fund community colleges so that people can further their education? A lot of people in this area depend on community colleges. They can learn a skill. They can even learn a skill as it pertains to the gambling industry. Hopefully once this takes off and that criteria is added. But a lot of the medical technology that is going on, whether you're performing MRIs or you're doing CAT scans, you can learn all that and get a skill in community college, and that's helping families. So money towards community colleges, money toward manufacturing, to bring back manufacturing to Massachusetts. We know across this country, and especially in the Commonwealth, that we've had communities decimated when that one factory leaves, whether it was a furniture factory in Western Massachusetts. So how do we continue to grow these type of industry? And so money going toward that. We had education, we had that, I'm missing one. Transportation Infrastructure Fund, which is huge. I mean, that's the biggest one. How am I forgetting it? They cannot open, these facilities cannot open unless they're doing construction and have done construction and commit. It's over $500 million as far as infrastructure improvements. And I have to say, I'm very impressed by how Suffolk Downs has approached this, because they have literally for years done traffic studies. And not just here, they've worked with the whole North Shore Improvement Plan. And their transportation was out, they released it before we even were able to get to a vote or a date of a vote. That's important. That's very important to the residents in Revere and East Boston and Chelsea and and Lynn and the whole North Shore. And I think that they have done yeoman's work, literally not only doing these studies but working with all of the community groups that reaching out to them on their own to let the community groups offer their input, to let them be in on the conversation. And I think that that's been a huge thing too. So those are some of the things. Also, a lot of people are concerned about lottery, the local aid money. This is a really big deal too. Like, people are hearing, oh, if a casino comes in, our lottery aid will dip. Well, so there's some studies that say it might dip for a couple of years, right, and then go back up. So we took that into account as we looked across the country at the different bills we were looking at. And literally, we actually hold it harmless by, if it dips, the gambling entities themselves have to come up with the money to bring that to level funding. So, it's not coming from Revere's input, it's not coming from the revenue that we get, it's literally coming from the gambling facilities. So those are some of the things that I think are very important in the bill, and there's, a whole host of other things, but I'm not going to talk
And,
forever
and,
here.
and just to the lottery, just for a second, I think it was in one of the evaluation criteria that the Gaming Commission looks at. I think part of their evaluation is
Yes.
the impact of that casino application on the lottery. So
Yes,
yeah.
and they have to have lottery facilities, I believe, in the all of the casinos as well. Because the other thing is, we all know we have the most successful lottery in the world.
Yes.
And we know that in this area, people like to play the lottery, and we also know that we see a lot of buses, leave, Northgate daily to go to Foxwoods and Mohegan Sun. Yeah. So how do we capture some of that revenue and bring it here and make it more convenient for, I'd rather drive, to Beachmont basically in East Boston than to Connecticut, and I'd rather leave my money with Massachusetts and not with another state. So that's another thing I would like to do.
Agreed. Senator Petroselli.
Just when we looked at this, we were looking at best practices, maybe not so good practices across the country, and trying to adopt a law. And there's a variety of elements in it that we viewed as for example, when we created the commission. I'm kind of segueing into maybe another topic.
No, that's
right?
quite all right.
That's perfect.
When we looked at formation of the commission itself, we wanted to make it very independent with people that are experienced in a variety of elements of a casino industry, and that's why we have the appointments to the commission itself made outside of the purview of the legislative process. The governor, the attorney general, the treasurer appoint 3, and then the 3 of them agree on the other 2. There are elements of public safety and gaming experiences that each of the members has to have. And we believe that was the best way to proceed with at least the structure of the process. We saw in other parts of the country where the legislature or the legislative leaders might have been involved with site selection, licensing. It wasn't a real good idea. And so we wanted to make sure we looked, and we looked in a variety of parts of the country and the world when we were coming up with the language, at least for the transparency, for the process, and for the commission itself. I want to add too, the issue of gaming expansion in Massachusetts at large, we talked about a lot in this process, and I guess the recapture of revenue of gambling money that goes out of state is a real issue, and one of the elements of the criteria by which an applicant has to show that they're going to do a better job than their competitor applicants is how do they propose to recapture upwards of $1 billion a year that goes to Connecticut and Rhode Island casinos. It's a real number. I think that it's evident that it's a real number that Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods are both applicants to try to set up a defense, I guess, so to speak, that they expect to lose revenue from the Massachusetts market, that by most accounts that we were able to review, per capita, people in Massachusetts gamble more than most other states. I don't know why that phenomenon exists, but it gets to one of the points, in my opinion, of exposure to gambling, right, and adaptation, which psychological terms that a lot of people have analyzed over the years. There's a hypothesis that the closer you live to a gambling facility, the more likely you are to be a predatory problem gambler. And from the analysis that I've looked at, from studies done by people at Harvard, people at McGill University looking at the casinos in Quebec, the hypothesis is actually proven to be false. And what they'll describe the reason for that to be is that people at a high level of exposure adapt or already have adapted. And when we were looking at this bill in 2009 to 11, before we enacted the law, we realized that that people in Massachusetts, because of a very mature lottery with a lot of opportunities to play different games, because of the regional makeup of expanded casino gambling in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and even Maine, for that matter, that people in Massachusetts have already been exposed over a serious time period to expanded gaming in one form or another. And so we don't really necessarily expect to see a dramatic jump in problem gambling because it's here already. quite frankly. And those are some elements we looked at.
But to that point, I mean, and if there is, you've addressed it in the legislation with funding for people with those problems.
And not only have we addressed it as far as funding, I mean, we recognize it exists, and we weren't doing a good enough job as a state with the money we were putting into it. And we know, again, that there's a crisis with all kinds of addiction in Massachusetts. So in our bill, which is really amazing, which no one else has, and this is the beauty of learning from the good and the bad across the country, if you have a loved one with a gambling addiction, you can actually walk into a casino and ban them. I mean, that's incredible. Like, and when we tell people this, people are just taken aback, and that's significant. That's really important to the small amount of families that struggle with this. I mean, that's huge. And Eileen Warner and the people at the Compulsive Gambling organization were really thrilled with that, and it's something they want, and we made a commitment to them to do that because they felt it was significant. I think even on the Revere side, I don't know if it's on both sides or not, there's something about inebriated drivers, like because people are concerned about people leaving. Literally, if someone is identified as someone who's had too much to drink, there's a requirement that someone at the casino has to get them home. I mean, these are really very serious and conscientious decisions, not only made on our level, but also on the city's levels.
The exclusion list that Kathy referred to, it's the first in the nation. No other state, out of the 38 states that have casino gambling in the country, no one has an exclusion list that allows you to put a family member on the exclusion list. You can put yourself on that exclusion list in a lot of other states, but this is a very progressive approach. In that way that I know that Eileen was very
and we heard a lot from our colleagues because people were concerned about, on the entertainment side, on community theater side, about only having so many seats, at the entertainment venues at these casinos, because there was a concern of them, not being able to exist as they exist. I mean, we took that into consideration. That's in the bill as well. So there's a lot of different parts of this bill that we really tried to make sure that we were working, hand in hand, not only with the addiction side, but also with other business and other entertainment venues. It was really significant to me.
And that gets next to the next point that I had in there, and that was mitigation protections to cities and towns. And I was thinking, particularly, first off, there's an annual review on cities and towns that may be impacted, where there are funds available to help them mitigate against those impacts. Talk about that a little bit.
There's a couple different ones. There's what the cities of Boston and Revere are going through now, which is the host community agreement, the HCA. I think you probably have talked exhaustively about that amongst, but you can't talk about it enough. That was paramount. I mean, there was no way this was going to go through without the communities having the final decision. But also, if you are a surrounding community, you can apply for impact mitigation money. If you put together proposals, submit it to the Gaming Commission. It's all independent, like Anthony said. There's a lot of stigma around, not the right thing happening as far as gambling is. So to get rid of all that, and Anthony was right, it's the most transparent process. We also said, here you go, Gaming Commission, you're your own entity, you make these decisions. They also are going to take these agreements, whether it's the host community agreements, whether it's the applicants, and whether it's the surrounding community mitigation, saying, okay, is there a need? Are they impacted? How do we work with it? And I again, like Suffolk Downs has gone above and beyond. They've spent a lot of time in Winthrop, a lot of time in Chelsea. They don't have to. They're not voting, but to say, how can we work with you, because we know that there'll be positive and negative impacts. So especially with traffic, things like that. I mean, really going out of their way to even work with the surrounding communities. And that they didn't have to do that. That's not in the agreement. But I think, in the long run, it's going to make a better application for them, because they've been doing the right thing, I think, with, the nonprofits and all of that.
Yeah, I guess on this topic, we wanted to make sure that when we set the tax rate for the licensed casinos, that we not only made a tax rate that was competitive from a regional standpoint, but also one that left some room under their financial ceiling to sign community agreements with their host communities that were really good. And so the 25% tax of gross gaming revenues is very competitive. You look at the state of Pennsylvania, they're 60%, I believe. In New York State, might be as high as 67%. They still do pretty well Pennsylvania, I believe the past year or two has actually surpassed every other state from a revenue standpoint that they collect for the state of Pennsylvania. And they've been pretty competitive. But allowing, with a competitive tax rate, municipalities to negotiate community agreements, and what I've said about the community agreements both in Revere and in Boston for East Boston's sake, has anyone ever seen a development process that has had an end agreement that would yield as much benefit that these have? I mean, that's just a reality that there really hasn't been any. When you talk about the amount of money in the form of taxes paid, an impact fee paid, the amount of jobs created, the environmental benefits that they create with a LEED Gold certified building as proposed, with the investment in infrastructure that they're making, with the investment in capital, from schools to playgrounds to ball fields. There's not another development process we've ever seen or might ever see that in the end will yield as much benefit as the agreements that Mayor Rizzo and Mayor Menino have signed.
And let's be honest too, I mean, Suffolk Downs has been there for over 75 years. And they've been a really good neighbor. They've been someone who, like, if a Little League needed help, they helped the Little League. If they, if there was an organization they could help, whether it's a nonprofit or even loaning their space for, the autism walk that happened on Sunday, or, letting the Revere Pop Warner have their banquet upstairs. I mean, they have been someone who's stepped up to the plate for both of these communities. So they've had a track record of it. And, like Anthony was saying, I mean, about being used to it, I mean, we grew up in Revere with 2 tracks. We grew up in East Boston with 1. Overall, it wasn't a negative experience because everybody knew somebody who worked there. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to do that again, and to have all these people working, and have all these families being supported? I mean, they were known for helping out someone who they knew got laid off, or those things are more significant than anything if we even get out of what the regulations and everything is. I mean, that's something, and they're just doing what they have always been doing. It's not all of a sudden they're showing up and they're promising you the world. They've, to whatever degree they've been able to do, they've always been a really good member of the community.
A large part of this day and all of these roundtables is of course to get out information about Revere's host community agreement with Suffolk Downs. But something you just said, kind of brings me back to that a little bit before we get to the Gambling Commission. And that is, both of you being involved in this legislation, all the studies that you've done, all the places that you've been, have probably seen other HCAs. Host community agreements from other cities and towns. How would you compare what the city of Revere has, versus what you've seen in terms of its quality, if you will?
Well, let me take a stab at that, Ed. In the process of coming up with this legislation and coming up with a personal position on the proposed casino at Suffolk Downs, I spent a lot of time looking at other communities across the country, different states. I visited some communities in Pennsylvania, had some phone conference calls with mayors of other cities in Pennsylvania. And I'd have to say, I have yet to hear of a municipality that gets as much financial benefit directly as Revere or Boston will in this regard. But for me, most importantly, in that process, I was interested because, if you read some academic research and you hear from people that are opposed to the casino, and I have a lot of good friends that aren't thrilled with the idea of a casino at Suffolk Downs or in Massachusetts, and we politely disagree. But, the sound bites that you hear just arbitrarily, it's going to bring more crime. It's going to bring lower property values. It's going to cannibalize small businesses, right? When you hear that, your hair stands up. And believe me, I wanted to make sure that stuff wasn't true. My wife and I own our own home on Gladstone Street in East Boston. We can walk just one street over and see Suffolk Downs from the hill. We have 2 kids that go to school in East Boston. She owns a small business. If for 1 second I thought that this was going to cause problems, I wouldn't be for it. I wouldn't be asking people to consider to be for it. Yeah. And so I went to Pennsylvania. I sat with Mayor DiGirolamo in Ben Salem. It's a community of about 55,000 people. We spent the day there going into small businesses. talking to public safety officials. It's a racetrack casino, and it's partly why I picked that location to go look at it. And the point that I want to make is that life coexists. In 38 states. In Bensalem, there were no shuttered small businesses. There were some new businesses that happened as a result of the casino. There wasn't rampant crime. Property values were going up after the decline in real estate values that hit most of the country. And life coexists. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I talked to Mayor Callahan for a while, and where the old Bethlehem Steel had for generations provided blue-collar jobs. They built a resort casino. And in the city of Bethlehem, there's a rebirth of their economic center as a result of the casino. Infrastructure improvements have made traffic better, not worse. From a public safety standpoint, the city of Bethlehem is the safest city of its size in the state of Pennsylvania. Iowa has 20 casinos in it. You know, the sky hasn't fallen in Iowa. And so I just went off on a little bit of a tangent.
No,
I don't
that's
even
quite
remember
all right.
what the point
Well,
was.
I asked about the
raised.
HCA agreement
HCA
versus
agreements,
other
yeah.
ones, and you have
Yeah.
answered it.
Yeah, so I guess the point I've been trying to make to neighbors when they ask me why I support this concept as proposed is because the host community agreement benefit most certainly outweighs the impacts. I have not found you know, fact to back up the I want to be polite, but I guess the rhetoric of it's going to arbitrarily, just no matter what, it's going to bring these bad elements. Philadelphia, I met with the superintendents of police in downtown Philadelphia, the Fishtown neighborhood. It's similar sized East Boston. It's about 35,000 people. It's a little bit smaller. We met with people who live there and have lived there for generations. They have a casino on the Delaware River. And, you know, they were ready for, you know, just some increased activity because it's a new business. And so they originally deployed 15 new officers to patrol the Fishtown neighborhood. Within 6 months of the casino being open, they realized they were wasting resources. They didn't need them. So they cut their deployment down to 3 officers every 9 hours or whatnot, right? So they cut down their deployment. You know, the gentleman who runs their host community agreement's a little bit different. So they actually have one that was formally signed with their own neighborhood association, Fishtown, right? And they get, I think it's $1 million a year. And every year they have a grant giving process they go through. Everything is done transparently. The gentleman that helped set that up through a pro bono donation, who lives right there in Fishtown, about 400 yards from the front door of the casino, is the Vice President and General Counsel of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Pennsylvania. You know, this guy is, you know, Ivy League educated. Another woman who's lived in the neighborhood for 30 years doesn't have to beg people to give money for her kids' youth sports teams anymore, right? So what I found out as I've looked in other parts of the country is if there were these rampant problems, I don't think you would have seen continued expansion over the last couple of decades of resort casinos in the country. And the fact that there are 38 states that do it. And the sky hasn't fallen in places like Iowa and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Minnesota. I think I understand that there are people that are afraid of it. I get it. I mean, you know, it's not something to be taken lightly. I don't think Kathy and I and our colleagues have taken this issue lightly. And I think that in the end, the benefits most certainly will outweigh whatever impacts happen.
I mean, I agree with Anthony. I mean, I've spent my whole career on this, and I wouldn't put myself out there if I didn't think it was going to be beneficial, regardless of, you know, any dangling carrots that people think are in front of them. I'll just start by saying, like, Mayor Rizzo, since he's come in, has been incredibly ambitious, right? He talked about increased public safety, cleaning up Broadway, and he's been very ambitious in the last 2 years of his first 2 years in office of making people, having those results happen, okay? And, you know, we've got great public safety officials and public safety personnel in this community. You know, he has a director of economic development for the first time. I mean, they had that great summit. You had people from other parts of the country looking at what possibly could happen. And I think you'll see more of those people and the people that were there wanting to invest if this happens more than if it doesn't. You know, people think that, you know, we're up here saying, you know, it's a panacea. I mean, nothing is a panacea. It's also not Armageddon, okay? You know, like Anthony said, the world is not going to end. You know, it's not going to be raining cats and dogs. It's, you know, there's not going to be, you know, lots of birds and, you know, blood and all of that. It's not going to exist. But, you know, I find it interesting that people are saying, if this happens, I'm going to leave.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that, yes.
Yeah, and that, you know, that breaks my heart because I love this city and I grew up here too. And I just wish people would see the city for what it is, all right? This is a great community. It's different than what it was when you grew up here, when I grew up here. So here's the reality of our community. Crime does exist here.
Yes, it does.
Drugs do exist here. Diversity exists here, and that's a good thing. And people don't realize we are not suburban. We are urban. So, you know, what comes with that? You know, we are not this nice little suburb. We are very urban. Let's embrace that. Let's see what we can do to help that. How do we help that? Mayor Rizzo's been great. We need to increase public safety, okay? This all costs money. You know, like a better youth center, you know, having more activities, more open space. This all costs money. The government, the federal government shut down right now. You know, I was just at, you know, Capic in Chelsea, which also services Revere and Winthrop, and we're talking about how a lot of their funding is federal. What's going to happen to those kids? What's going to happen to those parents who are now going to have to leave their jobs to stay home with their kids, right? So, you know, government's been good, and the state, we've certainly been good, and the city's been good as far as, you know, caring about the programs that we care about. But, you know, money is tough, and it's going to continue to be tough. So, like Anthony said, now we're going to have this revenue that we can put into this, that we can increase our public safety. And you know, one of the main things in the host community agreement the first few years is to get a new youth center and to rebuild the stadium, which will create more park space and open space. That's really important. You know, and I have to say, Michael Hinojosa and everyone at the rec department, they're bringing programs that cover all ages, which is nice. We haven't seen all ages covered in a long time, and that's great. I mean, you know, this is reminding me of when I was a kid growing up here and all the different programs and the sports programs. These things cost money. And, you know, without an industry coming in that will provide the revenue and provide the jobs, it will be by far the biggest tax contributor. No one will come close to what it will if they come in. I mean, that's not, you know, me saying it's a panacea. That's just the reality of it. I mean, that's significant. That's so significant that people need to understand it. And if you're against it, great. What's your solution? What's your ideas? And this is what I've said to a lot of the opposition. I respect if it's a religious thing. I respect if you have a member of your family, you know, and you had, you know, really heartbreaking issues with addiction. I respect that. What's your alternative? What's going to happen to these parcels? We know that they're looking at the Shaw's parking lot. We know that in the areas of Beachmont and Shirley Ave, you know, that's an eyesore, and it's depressing. That supermarket was open for generations. Everybody worked there too. Everyone worked there. Saratani's worked there. Everyone in Beachmont worked there. All my friends from Beachmont worked at Saratani's. Yep. You know, when Saratani's closed and it became Shaw's, it was tough enough. But now you've got an empty parcel. That will be developed in 5 seconds in a positive way, right? More revenue, tax revenue, you'll be a hotel, you'll have additional taxes. What will happen in part of Revere Beach that we've been trying to develop and we've dreamed, all of us have dreamed about for our lifetimes? You know, we are right there. And it's a great partnership with the city and the state officials and, you know, everyone involved, like getting everyone to the table, whether it's the Mass Department of Transportation, whether it's, you know, the Secretary of Education, whether it's the Governor's Office, whether it's Superintendent Dakin, you know, everybody has really worked together to really make our schools first class. You know, how do we keep this going? How do we retain some of these great kids that are leaving our school system? How do we retain them to stay in Revere and pay taxes here and work here? We do that by offering them more options. These are some of the options we can offer. You know, you have some kids that no matter what are never going to be able to go to college, whether they either can't afford it or they just don't have the skill set. But they deserve to have a good life, and they deserve to have a good job, and they want to work hard. And that's what this community was always based on. You know, you had hardworking people that just wanted to make their kids' lives better than theirs. And that's what we're looking to do here.
So what am I going to do to convince you that this is a good thing?
Oh, I don't know.
Did you have another point to make on that, or
Well,
no?
go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, moving on. And one of the other things I wanted to cover was the gambling commission itself,
Sure.
the makeup of the commission, and the work that's been done in about ensuring the integrity of that commission. I think you alluded to it earlier. Talk about that a little.
Yeah, I guess you know, the media likes to make, at least in this region, the Tom Menino versus Steve Wynn fight, right? For
Right.
the Everett proposed casino versus Suffolk Downs, and I think that that's something that sells newspapers, but it's not necessarily probably on the minds of the gambling commissioners,
Right.
right? As you've outlined here, there's a list of criteria.
Right.
We wanted there to be a competition. How much money are you investing in the ground? How many jobs are you creating from a construction standpoint, from a permanent standpoint? What kind of wages and benefits are you paying your workers? You know, what is your building at a high environmental standard? And you know, how much infrastructure improvements are you proposing to make? How do you propose to invest in local community small businesses? How are you going to attract better than your competitor applicant people from going to the Connecticut or Rhode Island casinos to go to your casino?
Right.
So there's a list of criteria written into the law that these very independent commissioners, through a very transparent review process, will decide who the best applicant is. And you know, we're excited about that process. I think that it's to get back to, I think, what Kathy was talking a little bit about. I think a not often enough talked about point that I've shared with some of my closer friends who don't like the idea of a proposed casino is, and it actually, I think, has more of an impact in Revere because of its closer proximity, and particularly with Revere Beach Parkway to Everett, is for whatever reasons you don't like the idea of a casino to be proposed at Suffolk Downs to be built, rest assured those same reasons must exist for a casino proposed to be built just a couple miles down the road in Everett. And so in the end, I consider it to be biting off my nose to spite my face if I vote no on the casino proposal at Suffolk Downs, because lo and behold, they've already got their agreement signed in Everett. They've already passed their ballot question. So they will be before the Gaming Commission with their application. And whatever bad you think is going to happen from a casino at Suffolk Downs, it's going to happen from a casino in Everett. Just the same. I just can't imagine that there's really any measurable difference. Again, I actually don't agree with the levels of what the impacts would be, but in recognition that some people don't share the same opinion as Kathy and I do, the reality is that that's where the main competition is, right? And if for whatever reason ballot questions don't pass in East Boston or Revere, then it's a pretty strong likelihood that the casino proposal at Everett might get approved, and we'll get nothing out of it. When you talk about all of the money and the investment in the jobs, I mean, just imagine that in the host community agreement in Revere, Suffolk Downs has to spend annually $7.5 million on the purchase of goods and services at Revere businesses. Where else does anyone have the ability to leverage a developer in any process to get that kind of a benefit? Nowhere. And so when we think about it, I try to make sure people understand the context that Everett's already in line. They're waiting to go through this process with this criteria with the commissioners at the Gaming Commission. And it should be a fair fight. We should be, you know, we should be there too, and make the best application, get the license.
You know, you were talking about different host community agreements, and you know, Anthony's done a lot of traveling. Not even looking at them, I love this comparison. Is, you know, I believe Everett's community host agreement was about 16 pages. I believe Revere's was a minimum of 66, and Boston's was over 100. We took a long time. Both cities took a long time because it was so important, and they fought a long time. You know, yeah, probably a majority of people went gambling, but and there's a lot of, you know, benefits as we've discussed today. But it's important that we do it right, which is why we took so long to get it out of the legislature, and it's why it took so long here to get this date set for November 5th, because we want to make sure it's done right. We want to make sure it's in the best interest of the cities and the people that live in them. That was, really, really paramount. And I think, I would hope, the Gaming Commission, like Anthony says, has a long host of criteria. So it's not a popularity contest when they get it. They are charged with a serious job that they have to look at everything that's done. And I think, at the end of the day, when Suffolk puts theirs forward, they're going to be successful. Anthony talked about some of them, we talked about the $500 million investment, a 75-year lease on the land has to be secured. There's a license deposit, there's a casino fee, the impact and mitigation issues have to be identified, the host community agreement has to be signed, surrounding community agreements have to be signed, agreements have to be signed with impacted live entertainment venues like we discussed. There's a huge application fee, there's host community bylaws that have to be adhered to, there has to be the ballot question, there has to be a community impact fee paid, and there has to be outreach to even minority contractors and affirmative action programs and what we talked about working with businesses. That's all part of the application for you to even apply. So, there's a lot that has to go into this application, and it's really important that it's done right. And I think it was a very tough, I'm sure it was a tough, mitigation process with both mayors and their people, but I think they did a great job.
Well, and there's two other parts to that, the whole package of legislation that was put together in terms of what the Gaming Commission looks at. And one was, even before the application process, there was a process that all of the applicants had to go through earlier this year where they identified all the participants.
Yes.
Suitability.
Suitability
process.
Okay, and it was during that process that one of the Vornado, thank you.
Right.
Actually backed out. Said, "Nah, we don't want to go through that process."
Right.
And we've seen that in a couple of different locations.
Okay.
So for the Gary Pentowski, the longtime owner of the Plain Ridge Racetrack,
I saw that. Right.
he was ruled not suitable for the application process. Penn National Gaming has come in and bought at least the opportunity. They brought in the opportunity to have a slot facility.
There's so many checks and balances involved in this because, again, it's transparency. It's making sure that we are way above board on every single level you can't even think about.
Yeah.
And
then of course, going back to the evaluation part, I think if I remember right, there are 5 commissioners, and there are actually 5 evaluation criteria. We talked about overview, finance, economic development, building and site design, and mitigation. And if I remember right, the commissioner basically at the luncheon had said that each one of them has the responsibility for one of these criteria. They're going to do their paper, put this position on that criteria, and then bring it back to the rest of the commission and basically get the rest of the commission to agree with them. So they have to sell it to the rest of their compatriots, if you will. I thought that was an interesting process. And then the other thing that came out from, I think, was an interview again with the gaming commissioner, is that in terms of the integrity of all of this, is that he can't even be in the room with any one person unless there's somebody else there. For the fear that there may be discussions about gambling or whatever.
One of the other commissioners, you mean?
They live stream everything.
Yeah.
Their social media stuff. They're crazy on Twitter as far as we're live streaming the meeting right now. Everything is open. Everything.
Yeah,
is
it's a
open.
very open process. So, kudos to you guys for your involvement in the legislation that kind of created that environment. Because again, going back to what we talked about earlier, the perception of misdoings and so forth. Heading that off with all of these things has been great.
I have to say too, one other thing that Anthony was saying. It's always interesting too, people who are against it. All the local aid all over this state comes from gambling money. It comes from lottery money. And what I found interesting, what you hear was from some people now, when we were working on this with some of our colleagues who were trying to make decisions for my constituents and Anthony's constituents. And, we saw it a little bit, Sal Lamatina did a great job, and you did too, and so did Carlo, in front of the Boston City Council, making that it had, it was up to East Boston to have this vote, just like it was up to Revere, because it's their neighborhood, and it's the size of Revere for the most part. It's its own city. They're impacted by it. They should make the decision. But I always found it really, really interesting when people were telling me what my people couldn't decide for themselves. It was insulting too. And I mean, here's the decision. The people are going to get to make the decision, and it's up to the people to get the facts and to really look at both issues and to get the facts. And what I always, I used to go around when we were trying to get the votes for the legislature, and I would say to someone, okay, well, would you be okay if I filed an amendment then to take away your local aid? Because honestly, most of high numbers of the lottery money is generated in places like East Boston, Revere, and Chelsea, but it's doled out more evenly, not proportionally. So, well, how about I file an amendment that I take back our proportion because we would be getting even more. Yeah. And they looked like, you're taking this money now, and we know that it works, and we know that it's helping our communities, and it's public. So, it's kind of hypocritical. I always would kind of say that going forward, and I say that now because it's hypocritical to not have an alternative. Just to say you're for or against something, you have to know why. And you need it's incumbent upon all of us to get our facts right about it.
And therein lies the reason for this roundtable today, is to try and get most of the facts out. I think we've hit just about everything that we could think of in terms of issues that people brought up, questions that they had, problems that they saw, or whatever, to try and get people as informed as possible for come November 5th. And hopefully we'll get a good turnout and a good vote.
Yeah, I'm glad that Revere TV, too, is doing this, because it's really important to get as many media outlets and get as much information out as we can. And, I'm always available to answer any questions. I know Anthony's office is, too, and I know the mayor feels the same way. So we're here to, help people through the process if we can as well.
That being said, have you seen an increase in phone calls or questions relative to this?
I've not, but what I'm noticing is again, we have been dealing with this so much. What we realize is, obviously the average person doesn't know all of the things that are in the bill. And I was talking to a group of people on Friday night, a group of women, and explaining to them about what we talked about, how you could go in and exempt your family member. They were really taken aback when they heard some of these things. We've been dealing with it for so long. It's like, oh yeah, but it's really important to actually have those conversations, because people are really blown away when they realize all the things that are in this bill.
Yeah. Any last comments?
No, just thank you for having us.
I'll throw one more out.
Go ahead.
Please do.
Because I can't stress enough, and I know it's their slogan, it's about jobs.
Yep.
Yes.
But I can't stress that enough. It's no secret that some people view a local representative or a senator as an employment agency sometimes.
Yep.
And I'm not afraid to say that. That's a reality, and it's just honesty that, people are always looking for different job opportunities. And the prospect of creating upwards of 4,000 full-time jobs
in our neighborhood
is enormous. And my experience with visiting some different places in Pennsylvania is that hundreds and hundreds of people who live in the surrounding communities and the host communities work at these facilities. And they're good jobs. There's a lot of upward mobility opportunity. The spectrum ranges from people with a GED or a high school diploma to, Iraqi war veterans that run security in some of these places. Like in Ben Salem, there was a two-tour Army veteran that served in Iraq that was the head of security. There was a gentleman who was in the accounting office that had an Ivy League degree. And there were a lot of blue-collar jobs that had upward mobility opportunities for people with either a GED, a high school, or a college diploma. Yeah. So it's good opportunities. Yeah. The jobs, it's a huge issue for at least my standpoint.
And on that note, too, the tracks were known for employing a lot of single mothers because there's different shifts. So this is an opportunity again. I mean, Anthony's absolutely right. I mean, it is about jobs. This is what we have talked about since the beginning. And for people to say to someone that your job isn't good enough, people want to work, people want to have pride, they want to show their kids that they can do this, and they want their kids to look them in the eye and be proud of them. And you know what? It's about having a job, and we've had so many people that have been struggling because they've been laid off, and especially in the trades. Unfortunately, we've had, instances of suicides in some of our trades because they evaluated that they were better off to their family alive than dead. And that's a horrible decision to have to make. And, you know, this is about restoring that balance, that security, and, you know, just that self-worth to people.
Yeah.
And these are good jobs. A job is a job, and these are good jobs.
Yeah,
and no one should look down on that.
Yeah, and beyond that, even the jobs with the casino, I mean, it's also about saving jobs.
Yes.
Close to 1,000 jobs that now
Yes.
are at the track that will probably go away.
Right.
And probably creating even more jobs beyond the casino in terms of
Absolutely.
the economic development that will take place in the city of Revere once this casino bill passes.
There's a $200 million industry in horse farms in Massachusetts. A lot of them are along the North Shore
Yep.
and in Central Mass. I mean, that will leave
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
And, you know, those are, you can't, you know, we talk about job retraining. How are you going to retrain a blacksmith who's like a fourth generation blacksmith? I mean, you're going to put him in a class and say, let's learn computers at 45, 50 years old? I mean, we have to be realistic about it.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yep.
I think that if hopefully both communities pass the ballot question on November 5th, when it does get to the Gaming Commission, I think that is just the big difference maker between anyone else proposing a resort casino in this region or in Massachusetts for that matter, and what Suffolk Downs has to offer is what you just said. The thoroughbred industry, it's the last remaining thoroughbred racetrack in all of New England, based on you know, milestones in the legislation. If they're awarded a license, they're going to have to increase their race days.
Yep.
Right now they're at 80 days a year. They'll have to be racing by year 3 of their resort casino license, 125 days, with higher purses, with investments in a breeding program at those farms across Massachusetts. So you know, a resort casino at Suffolk Downs can economically reach more corners of Massachusetts than any proposal that's out there. We think that is the biggest, you know, difference from a positive for their application.
Oh, the location doesn't hurt either.
No.
It's a great location, and people want to develop, and they want to work, and they want to go. They come to Boston, and we're right there, and it's a perfect place.
So what I've tried to do today and with all of you and with the mayor and everything else is just to try and bring out as much as we can about the facts of all of this.
Yes.
To get people as informed as possible about this in as an open manner as possible. So it's all up to you right now to kind of learn about it. There are 2 other meetings coming up this month, open meetings, public hearings that the mayor is holding, one on the 19th of October at City Hall and another one on the 30th at the Senior Center. Those will be meetings that they'll be there discussing the mitigation package. They'll be taking questions and answers at that point as well. So get out to those meetings, get more information, and by all means get out there on November 5th because this is so important to the city. Thank you. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
For everybody else who's been here today, thank you all, and take care.